My group did a project on lobbying for the legalization of marijuana. I'm working with Laura Kazakowicz and Michael Asala. So I will use the last role model to introduce the group that we interviewed and researched for our project. We researched a group called NORML, which stands for the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And we talked to a man named Eric Williams, who's the chapter head in Connecticut. Their message is to promote the legalization of marijuana and to educate the public. First, they focused on decriminalization, and they got decriminalization passed in Connecticut. They then focused on getting medical marijuana legalized, and that was then passed in Connecticut. And now they're focusing on educating the public and legalizing recreational use in Connecticut. The audience of the group called NORML is all voters, state legislators, and Congress. The way they get their word out is through commercials, the internet, and through direct communication. They like to talk specifically to state legislators. That's their preference. The effect that they've had is pretty massive. They have 445,000 likes on Facebook, and 18 states now allow, including DC, allow the use of medical marijuana. 2 states allow the recreational use of marijuana, and so they've had a big impact. First, we interviewed the man, Eric Williams, Eric Williams, who is the chapter head of NORML in Connecticut. We interviewed him over the phone.
Why do you think that there's more of a stigma socially with marijuana than with alcohol? Like, obviously alcohol is illegal, but why do you think that we have different standards on the two?
Well, I think that's pretty simple. We've gone through 40 plus years of the federal government spending hundreds of billions of dollars on public relations campaigns trying to convince the American public how bad marijuana is. It's gone through, billions of dollars that funnel right on down to programs like DARE and STOP and things, and they obviously incentivize local and state law enforcement to make these kinds of arrests. They pay them to go into schools and spend their propaganda. This is all, that's the main reason that there's a stigma, is we're overcoming 40 years of misinformation and straight up lies.
So when so many people are kind of given the wrong information by the government, how does a group like NORML, do you think that your #1 goal is to try and pass legislation like in Congress, or do you think that, educating the public is more important?
Well, I think that, first of all, let me just be clear here. I'm the director of Connecticut NORML. And so we generally, through Connecticut NORML, lobby our state legislatures, and that's where we've had a lot more success in lobbying state legislatures and changing laws on that level. That being said, I do lobby Congress for some other, for marijuana as well. It's not my job, and I'm all volunteer. I volunteer. I'm the director of NORML. But I'm sorry, what was really the question about that you wanted to ask? Is how do we do about it? I think the way that we go about it more than anything is just to educate people. And frankly, it's not all that difficult. Because when you have people going ahead and saying, the government's response is if you use marijuana, then you're going to, it is a gateway drug, and you're going to end up, addicted to crystal meth. Well, the bottom line is that the vast majority of Americans smoke marijuana at some point. The vast majority of Americans are big, productive members, functioning members of society. And so all people have to do is look at themselves, look at their own experiences, and they realize that it's BS.
So now that medicinal marijuana is getting more popular and decriminalization, do you think that legalizing it, it'll that'll just make it that much easier? Or has NORML changed any of its strategy now that they're working towards legalization, not just medicinalization or decriminalization?
I'm not going to speak for all of NORML because just like any other national organization with chapters across the nation, there's always going to be competing interests as to what you want to do. And further, there's going to be competing strategies, which is the best way, how do you achieve the end goal, which is to allow for legalization if that's what you want. For me, for my goals are making sure that the patients who need medical marijuana first are the ones who we're fighting for first. There's certainly a benefit. I think personally everyone should be smoking pot or taking in marijuana into their system on a daily basis. I think it's good for us, and for the most part, the entirety of human civilization, up until about 70 years ago in America, the ingestion of cannabis, or the taking of cannabis on a daily basis, was part and parcel of everyday human life. Up until about 70 years ago. So in this blip of time, it's just BS. People understand that, they get that. So when I get right down to it, you want to see that that people can use responsibly marijuana however they want. But adults can responsibly use it. But for a lot of persons, myself included, I want to make sure that the patients who need it get it before the persons who just want it.
Right. All right. This is just my last question. Is there, do you, off the top of your head, know about any current legislation that NORML is really pushing for in Connecticut or on the federal level?
Oh, absolutely. There's tons of it. But, in almost every state that's out there, there's some sort of marijuana reform. Whether it be, in Connecticut, there's medical marijuana sort of fix bill that's happening that's dealing with some of the issues that have arisen since the passage of medical marijuana bill last year. There's a push to include some form of chronic severe pain into it. That's here in Connecticut. On the federal level, yes, absolutely. We're pushing for a state's rights bill. We're pushing to address things like the banking issues because the medical marijuana industry has a real tough issue dealing with banking. We're also on the federal level looking at trying to change the tax codes. So again, medical marijuana businesses can work and be more contributing members of society as opposed to having to be taxed at close to an 80% rate. I'm working on legislation to legalize medical in both New York and in Illinois.
Next, we sat down with the second selectman of Wilton, Hal Clark.
So I'm here with second selectman Hal Clark, WNL alumni.
And he didn't tell me to bring my hat. Well, I do have my belt if you want to see.
Yeah.
So first question, would you say, is there a big difference, like you were talking about, that you lobbied in Hartford and in Washington? Are there any differences in the way a lobbyist group would operate between local and state or federal levels?
I think so. Washington tends to be surrounded by places like Alexandria, etc., and they are packed with associations. Most associations, and I've been a member of the Food Marketing Institute, National Association of Convenience Stores, International Council of Shopping Centers, etc., etc. If you're in industry, you tend to be involved in your association if you're at a senior level. Those things do two things. One of them, they gather some information, but they're largely organized, frankly, in order to lobby on issues that are of importance to the membership.
Right.
And so you go out as with those organizations. And when I've been in Washington and lobbied, I didn't do it as a paid lobbyist. I went in because I could represent some of the information that Congress needed to know about a law that they were considering.
Mm-hmm. So when you are lobbying, what do you think is your main goal? Is your main goal to try and influence the congressman, or are you like this group NORML on marijuana is really focused on educating the public, and that seems like that's their biggest way of lobbying, is to try and make the people want what they want. So how big of a role do you think public opinion plays in lobbying?
It depends entirely on the subject.
Right.
What they are is a pressure group, and which is okay, you know, and they have their point of view. Most lobbying that goes on that I've seen is because, you know, this is a big and complex country. To think that you can pass a law casually, it's not going to have not only positive influence, because they don't really bring forth a whole lot of laws, you know, just because they want to be mean. They think it's going to have a positive influence, but they don't know enough about the subject.
So do you think that marijuana, either the legalization or the just use of medical marijuana, do you think that there are, you know, things that they're not thinking about that could come about from?
I think in most of those situations, we have more political scientists than scientists talking, and they pick and choose the studies they want to present on both sides, frankly.
Right.
And so, which is fair. No one ever said that when you go into an argument, you're going to argue the other guy's case. But by the same token, before you pass a law, it is the obligation of this legislator to know both sides and to come up with a reasonable judgment. They can't do that without the lobbyists coming in and educating them. So it's interesting, and that's the wonderful thing about this democracy. On the Board of Selectmen, we from time to time pass an ordinance, and it's required by charter that we have a public hearing beforehand. Every time that we've gone to pass an ordinance and we've had a public hearing, we've learned something from the people who show up at that hearing that has enabled us to write a better piece of legislation, because it becomes law.
What do you have to say about lobbying on the state level?
It's a little different than the federal level. At the federal level, as I said, you have a lot of associations that various entities have created there, and so they have teams and teams of professional lobbyists that are there. At the state level, there are certain industries that have those groups, but I think there tends to be more involvement by the citizenry that come in and have an opinion, as opposed to large organizations that do it. That doesn't mean that you don't have, you know, environmentalist groups going there and some big national groups, right. But not every subject is going to have, you know, an association with, you know, 8,000 members who pay them to have 5 lobbyists on it. So it's a much more one-on-one kind of environment than that. And you tend to get much closer to the actual legislators than you do in Washington. In Washington, you may go in with a group and sit down with a congressman for 30 minutes. In Hartford, you're much more likely to grab somebody in the hallway and have a conversation, or find another time and venue to do it. And it's like Washington, it's very much information gathering on their part.
So, I don't know if you think we need this, but it was also, we were going to talk about factions, and do you think that there's a problem right now? Like, do you think we have too many factions, or do you think that there's a good balance? I forget what that was called, but there's supposed to be a balance where if there's one group, you know, say for marijuana, then another group will rise up against marijuana. So do you think that right now the level of the amount of factions is good, or do you think that it's keeping things from getting done, or that the people don't have a voice, or what do you think?
Well, I'm of the opinion that the people are only safe when the legislature is not in session. So, and I kind of mean that, you know, there's a tendency to say, well, because we have legislative power, we ought to use it. They certainly haven't used it very wisely, in my opinion on that. They spend far too much money, and they don't spend any time ever trying to figure out if that money is achieving their objective, achieving an objective that is worthwhile. We can't get rid of programs in Washington. Guess what? We can't get rid of programs in Connecticut. What was a good idea 25 years ago doesn't mean it's a good idea today. One of the issues we got, we call them factions, is that every little interest group who gets a law passed now becomes their advocate. And they wind up with some congressman or some senator or some state rep for whom that becomes, you know, very important.
Yeah.
And it's a base of their power. No one wants to give that away. And yet, you know, the fundamental issue is, do we still need to do this? Are we spending enough money? Are we getting a bang for our buck? And that's the question that, frankly, once you get past the level of town, particularly in a town like Wilton, where we have, it's basically run by volunteers. We want to be careful with those tax dollars because we have to pay them too. and if somebody at DPW leans on a shovel, Tom Thurgood and Bill Running get 15 phone calls. So local government is very attuned. You get too large a government, you get too far away from the location, it's very easy, because it's out of sight, out of mind, to forget that program that you believe so much in is really still coming out of people that need it. Government, in my view, has to be very careful. We can do something that businesses can't do. We can make you pay us. And as anybody who pays taxes know, we have. So it seems to me that if you can pass laws and make people take money out of their families, and they all have pretty good uses for it, like college tuitions, which are outrageous these days, then they ought to be thinking very carefully about how they spend that public's money, and they don't. You get away from the local area, and it becomes just a big pot of money. Well, let's get money from the state. Let's get money from the feds. So it's difficult because you've lost that immediate contact between the public, who is the consumer of that good, and the government, for whom the bureaucracies, in many ways, if you think about it, the government employees themselves,
most of them
have become
worried about paying taxes.
They have become the biggest lobbyists in the nation, and they lobby for their jobs, for their security, and more benefits. Not many people will get to retire at 55. The average state employee does. The average state employee also gets to have medical coverage until he turns 65 after he's retired. Nice benefit. We couldn't afford that in business to provide it.
After conducting our interviews and research, we've concluded that factions have a major role on the government. The Founding Fathers warned us against factions in Federalist 10, saying it would break up our country and we wouldn't get much done. However, after this project, we believe that the Federalist vision for containing the factions has been successful. Groups like Normal represent the people's wishes. They have over 445,000 likes on Facebook. Lobbying groups like Normal are proactive. They offer new ideas to the government, which might otherwise be ignored. Normal specifically is a perfect example of how factions promote linkage between the people and the government. It's a completely volunteer-based organization, so those who want their voices to be heard have the opportunity.
We were able to hear different opinions on the legislation of marijuana, and we learned about the lobbying process. We gained insight about how much influence lobbyists really have on legislation, and discovered that in many cases, their greatest priority is to educate the public. Stay classy, Mr. Shells.
Stand up for your right. Get up, stand up for your right.